Alright, hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a tutorial about how I draw eyes. This is for my friend Malcolm. So yeah, I usually start off by drawing a black silhouette because the way light works is basically you're always applying light to an object. Like everything in the world would look black without light, so when I'm painting, I'll always take a black silhouette layer and then lock the transparency so that your coloring can't go outside of that shape, and then I apply color and light on top of that. So I'm just going to start by creating a basic eye shape, and then we get going with the colors. I'm real particular about that little bit in the corner of the eye where the tear duct is. Always got to make sure that's the right shape for me. So since I'm helping Malcolm fix the eyes on Connor from Detroit, I'm going to be giving this eyeball here some blue irises. First we start by coloring in the sclera. That's what the white bit around the outside is called. But this part of it is never going to be perfectly white or perfectly desaturated because it is like a more cream color. It's not a perfectly white object. It's more like kind of a gel, honestly. But yeah. So, and in this picture, Connor's eye isn't in full light either, so no matter what you do, the sclera isn't going to be very bright anyway. His eye is slightly turned, so the iris shape isn't going to be a perfect circle. Granted, I'm not looking at Malcolm's picture right now, so I don't remember what exact angle the eye was at, but this is what I'm going with. And when I draw eyes up close like this, I usually take a round hard brush, turn down the hardness just a little bit, maybe around 50, so that way my edges aren't too hard unless I'm really pressing down with my stylus, and also it makes it easier to blend. And I'm not drawing any eyelids on these, I don't know, just because. So the outline of the sclera is just going to be slightly darkened anyway, because when you've got your eyelids around it, it creates a bit of a shadow. So in Malcolm's picture, we've got maybe a mid-level light on one side. It's kind of a little bit sharper than the other. And then on the other side, we have a faint background light. So for the most part, we're going to treat this image as if the brightest part is coming from the left, but not directly. It's more of a diagonal kind of light. But it's just straight side to side, so. And I know Connor's eyes aren't actually blue, but I'd like to imagine that he's got blue eyes, because, like, with the androids, like, you know how they've got all that blue blood and everything, then, yeah. So when you're coloring in the iris of an eye, it's kind of like what you see when you look at the iris is actually a pocket of fluid that's kind of like an inverted, it's like an inverted contact lens, and in the center of that is where the pupil is. That is always going to be perfectly black because that's where all the light goes into and is taken in by the brain. And everything around that is the rods and cones that make up the conical shape of the iris. My lines are a bit lazy here, but it's all good. So when when the light shines down, it's not going to hit every part of this iris, and it's not going to be perfect. But it is going to shine on that little bit under there, because the top of the iris forms a shelf that comes about halfway down the iris, or the pupil, that makes it so that only part of the iris is actually colored, because you're applying light to that colored surface. Now, I like to start off with a fairly transparent version of the color, because if you start off doing solid blocks of color, it creates too much of a contrast and it's harder to blend after the fact. So, and I always try to direction my strokes so that they form the rods and cones going in the right direction, so you can see that texture, and it just helps make sure that the 3D effect is, well, more effective. And I usually take my time blending and coloring the irises a lot, because it's just, well, you know, it's the prettiest part of the eye, and that and the pupil are what give the eye its character, so it makes sense. To me, anyway. So when you're drawing eyes, the outline of the iris that touches the sclera, it's not a perfect border, and so it's not going to be a perfectly solid outline. It's more of just like a dark faded area where the light cannot refract into. It's like you're looking down the edge of a sheet of glass, and that's like the dark part on the very edge. And the right side of the sclera here is slightly out of the sharp light, so it's going to be darker than the other side. And when you're drawing the iris, the brightest part of the color is usually going to be in the middle of the iris band, just because that is like the flat part, the flattest part of the iris that is facing the light. Because everything that's facing the light at the most direct angle is going to be the brightest, because it reflects off of it the clearest. And if it helps, when you're drawing realistic eyes like this, when you're trying to do the sclera, think of the sclera as kind of like a peeled boiled egg. That's kind of the consistency I would give it, only it's got a little bit more, you can see through it a little bit more, and it's got tiny veins in it. And then you get to do my favorite part, which is all the tiny shinies, and those are always going to be the brightest part of your drawing, or at least of the human body, because it is directly reflected light. So if any other part of your character's body is brighter than that, it had better be because the sun is like full blast on their skin, or it's also full blast on the sclera, and that's like the only reason that your skin should be any brighter than that, unless you're doing artistic effect, I suppose. But yeah, the shiny should always be 100% bright white. And it is always going to be positioned the most directly, like that is where the light comes in and bounces off. So that's always going to be facing the brightest light that there is. And you might have more than one shiny. If you have two different lights, then you'll also have two shinies. And here I'm going to pretend that the eyebrow is kind of darkened over there, so there's a bit of a shadow. And there's no top-down lighting here, so that it doesn't make it too hard of a shadow, but dark enough that it affects how the light can get in. And in some cases, not all, you'll have a very soft sort of a glare come off the eye. and that will usually go right along with the shinies or in the same sort of direction, but that's never going to be a straight line. That will always be curved because, of course, the eye is a perfectly round object for the most part. So here I'm going in and just reblending that border between the iris and the sclera, and I'm going to take the blend tool and sort of reinforce those rods and cones shapes to get the texture in and get all my weird scribbles out. And I typically use the blending tool very sparingly. I'm adding a little shadow down there because the bottom eyelid is making it a little bit hard to get the light over that shelf. So yeah, there's that. I'm just going to go in and mess with the color a little bit more. Based on where this light is coming in, I should have added some more color closer to that border between the iris and the sclera, but I didn't catch it the first time going around, but that's alright. And I usually, because I start off with very dark shapes as my silhouettes, I end up having to go back and reapply brighter and brighter colors, which is totally fine. And, because if you draw something too dark on something that's already light, that's hard to reverse in your brain and when you're drawing. So, because you're always just applying more light to objects that are already dark. So physically and artistically, it just makes more sense to me to start with a darker object. So I'm going in here and lightening up the shadows of the sclera a little bit more. Because unless you've got very low lighting, like which we do here, but unless you've got extremely low lighting, your sclera is never going to look black. I just use that as a sort of stand-in for not having the eyelids around. I'm just going to go in and recolor this a little bit here, because if it's a more skin tone, it would have a bit of a pink tint to it. And also because of the veins in the eye. So yeah, there's your eye. There's Connor's eye. And I'm going to go in and redo the shinies a little bit, because I just can't quit adding details to things. There we go. And sometimes there will be a little bit of a glint in there from the ring of tears around the eyelid. So I did that just for artistic effect. So now I'm going to add a new layer now that we've gotten that first tutorial out of the way. And I am going to do some different examples with different colors of irises. And I'm going to do 4 different angles of light so that you can see how that shape, that inverted, I lost all my words. Inverted contact lens. Yeah, there we go. Words. English. So you can see how that, I did it again. Contact lens. Just gonna quit now. So you can see how that contact lens works. So I'm gonna create 4 different copies of this eye. And they're all gonna be looking straight forward, so that we don't have to worry about different positionings of the eye. Because once you understand the physics of how the iris shape works, then it's pretty simple to apply it everywhere. Because art is just a lot of memorizing shapes and the patterns of how light works around different objects. This first eye is going to be green. And the second one is going to be some kind of brown. Orangey brown, I guess. And then we'll do sort of purplish gray. And again, a nice blue. And just for argument's sake, because I know Connor's eye is actually brown, we're gonna take this over here and make it a bit more brown. So I'm going to choose my directions of light now. For this first one, light is going to be from, I call it top-down lighting. It's going to be light that's pouring straight down. Blue one's going to be from the side. Purpley gray one's going to be from the bottom. And this one, we're going to do light shining directly into the center of the pupil, which is something I don't do often, but yeah. And I'm lazy with my colors today, so I'm just going to go back and pick up a color from the other eye to use for the sclera. So when I draw my sclera, I always start by using it to frame where the iris is going to be. I'm not always 100% accurate, but then again, nobody is unless they've been doing it for like 40 plus years, and I have not been alive even half that long. So yeah. And like I said, I don't ever just start by throwing down solid, hard blocks of color, because once you've gotten hard edges into your drawing, it's hard for your brain to want to go back from that. Like, you always want to keep that nice, solid border. Because it is pleasing, but also in this situation, like drawing human beings, you rarely ever have a perfectly straight, hard line anywhere. Even a crease, like in a fold of skin, is always blended out in some direction. And especially on the eyes, because it is like slightly transparent in some areas, so light can penetrate through different parts of the eye. And it's a rounded object anyway. Everything around it is round. So, yeah. You're always going to be dealing with soft edges and soft lights and brightness when you're drawing eyes. Because this is top-down lighting, the eyebrow and the eyelid beneath it are going to create a pretty good shelf of where the light cannot reach 100%. So the shadow is going to go about halfway down the eye. And you are going to have some pretty dark shadows up where the eyelashes are, because those tend to hide the upper eyelid. And because the iris is not perfectly flush with the rest of the eye, it does kind of bulge out a little bit. So it creates a bit of a shadow underneath itself onto the sclera. Now I'm going to go in and start applying my iris color, finally. Because of the shape of the contact lens that it is only going to have color on the bottom half. Because A, the light cannot touch the top, logically, and because of the shelf of the shadow. I know I broke my own rule there applying dark hard colors, but that was just a visual for you to see the boundary of where the color can and can't go. And these are very quick sketches compared to my usual stuff. I usually take a lot more time on the eyes or end up going back and doing things to them later because the rest of the picture has changed or the light around it has changed, and so the entire situation of how it needs to be colored is also changed. And of course you can always blend your colors up a little bit, just make sure there's never like a really hard stop of color. Because again, it is a rounded surface and it's a very slight roundness, if that makes any sense. So now I do my shinies, and again, the shiny is the brightest part of the eye. And this is where you really help show how round the eye is with like just a little bit of a swath of soft lighting. That's how you show the roundness of the eye. And then you apply shiny on top. Of course, you don't have to do it in that specific order, but it helps with the optical effect. So now I want you to just kind of zoom your eyes out, and I'm even super focused on watching me make this. And so have I, so just take a minute, zoom out, and then try to look at the eye from far away and just try to feel how three-dimensional it looks just because of those two tiny edits. Those two little blocks of light. And sometimes it helps if you've got some eyelashes above the eye. Those will cause a noticeable disturbance in that soft light area. Kind of breaks it up. You can't tell, of course, if you're zoomed out, but in this instance, we're zoomed in, so I'm just gonna create some little eyelash streaks. If you're careful with it, that can help lend a more three-dimensional look to your eye. Other times, it's a train wreck, and I do a lot of train wrecks as well. I just don't let people see those. So yeah, first eye complete. And this eye is not in very bright lighting, so just keep that in mind. That's why the sclera isn't brighter than it is. It's kind of hidden. And you always want to make sure when you're drawing your eyes that they have a good shadow around them somewhere, because they are always more inset into your skull. Like you've got your eyelids and then the cheekbones and you've got your eyebrows and everything and the bridge of the nose. So the eye is always more inset into the head. So you're never just going to have a perfectly like flat, bright space around it entirely. So for this eye, the light is coming directly from the right side. So of course the right side of the sclera is going to be bright and the left side is going to be darker. And that light is going to extend slightly under the iris. And I found that, oddly, when you look at an eye that's like this, the color of the iris is brightest on the left side. There's also going to be a bit of a shelf where the light can shine through the iris and starts making the sclera on that left side glow a little bit. That's why I have that slightly bright section there right between where the iris and the sclera meet. And so in this instance, the color of the iris is going to go right up against that border edge, because it's not actually perfectly black. It never is. Sometimes you might need to, though, if your eye is pretty zoomed out and small, just so you can get the basic shape in there. But in this instance, we're zoomed in, so you aren't actually able to see that super dark outline. I'm going to add a bit of a blue tint to this right side, just so you can see how the light can go through the sclera the other way and glow into the iris. But it's only slight, so you don't want to make it your brightest blue or anything. And I'm going to choose a slightly like bluish green color for our soft lighting. And if you ever zoom in on an eye that's got a spotlight on it, the surface of the sclera is never, it's not like perfectly flat or smooth. It always has a little bit of a texture to it, also like the surface of an egg. So it's going to have little tiny blotches of light on it. It's never like a perfectly straight or bold coloration. Because this light is brighter than the first time, I'm going to go back and reapply some even brighter blues just to really give it that light effect. And again, going in and reapplying the brightness, because I did not make that sclera bright enough for this light the first time. We've got more of that glow effect on the sclera. And yeah, there's our second eye. I'm going to start with the third eye, the bottom up lighting. This is what it would look like if you were, say, staring at your phone and it was down below you, you were in a dark room or something of that nature. I have not drawn eyes with this kind of lighting very often. I've done it maybe like 5 times, so this is not going to be as it's not going to be as good as the others, basically. I'm still trying to understand how it works, because every picture I look at with this kind of lighting, it just looks weird to me, because I just haven't memorized the pattern of it enough. But so yeah, there is a dark shadow here because of the shelf that the eyelid makes. So there's a dark bit on the bottom. The sclera on the bottom half is going to be extremely bright compared to the rest, but it's a soft blend because round. And so, logically, because of the shape of the iris, then the coloration is going to be on the top. I'm just going to start by cementing in the shape of the pupil, creating a bit of that glow underneath, and then bolding in where my outline will be. And again, just make sure that when you're coloring these, you keep your strokes on the iris very directional, because otherwise it just doesn't look very much like an eye. The texture of how you angle your strokes makes up it can make up a huge part of your drawing, which is a whole nother thing in and of itself, and I might do a tutorial on that later. This is just sort of a test run for me. But yeah, direction is everything, and it can take a long time to learn that. I was still struggling with that even like last year. It's like it's easy to look at a picture and go, oh, I just know that there are chunks of light here and here and here and chunks of this shadow here and here, but you can't always do that because there's always a pattern, a direction, a flow of the texture. Like, for example, if you're doing skin or like the curves of hair, you can't just plunk down big chunks of color wherever you like. There's always got to be a direction to it. So yeah, in this instance I probably could have made the iris quite a bit brighter. Like I said, I'm still critiquing myself on this one. But this is a fairly bright light, so the soft light is going to be a lot bigger and bolder than the others that we've done. I'm not entirely sure of the shape that I want to make this shiny here. It's odd because the shiny is usually perfectly round or like a triangle shape. It just depends. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of glint in this. There's going to be a lot of different shiny bits everywhere. Because in this, like, concentrated light, this is kind of like an LED light, you're going to get a lot of contrast between the light and the dark. And I did remember here, because I have done this type of lighting a couple of times before, you are going to have a pretty big shelf of light underneath. Bigger than you'd think. Because you might also have to compensate for the shape of the cheekbone, or the bridge of the nose, or something like that. And that can be hard because when you're drawing, you always have to be conscious of the shape of everything else and how those shapes are going to limit where the light can reach. Because light often does not bend around objects unless it is soft or refracted. I'm just going to go back in here and make the sclera quite a bit brighter. This is one of those instances when the sclera is going to be a near white color. I'm just going to go blend it in a little bit. So yeah, I think that one is pretty much good. Just gonna reinforce that shelf a little bit more and reapply the shinies. I love the shinies. Not super proud of this eye. I'm still learning how to do this light source myself, but for this attempt, I'd say it's fairly good. So now we're going to just start going in with the fourth eye. This is going to be light that is pointing straight into the pupil, like you're looking into a big bright lantern or something for a picture. And again, I'm lazy with my colors, so I'm just going to color pick from the previous eyes. And also the tone and the color of the sclera will change a bit. Like, you'll change hue based on the light around, but I haven't done that here. And in this instance, let's pretend you're not like me and you don't start with a dark shape. Let's pretend we start with a light shape and we're going to apply dark onto it. So, I'm gonna make my pupil shape. I know I said don't do hard outlines, but this is gonna get blended out, I promise. And again, for argument's sake, I'm just gonna put in the placebo eyelid. Just sort of give myself that border. And because we've got the light pointing straight on it, the sclera is going to be the same level of brightness on both sides. And I just want to reinforce that, like, I'm not looking at any reference photos for these currently, so this is just entirely freehand out of my head. They could probably be a lot better, but they ain't. So yeah, I'm going in and adding a medium level color in there to blend out that fake border. Because again, it's not really a solid border of anything, it's just a flat part of the lens that looks dark because it's facing you. And because this light is pointed straight onto this eye, we're going to make it so that the pupil is very small because it is dilated shut. If your character is looking into a bright light, their pupils are going to shrink down because it's too much light. That's when it starts to hurt your eyes. And if you're in a darker environment, your pupils are, of course, going to blow wide open so they can collect enough light to allow you to see. I'm going to start by going in here and applying the darkest color kind of directionally. And because the light is pointed straight in, the color of the iris is going to be the same all the way around. The brightness is 2. And you're going to see a darkened outline, like a bit of a fade going into the pupil and between the sclera and the iris. So the middle band of that iris is what's going to be the brightest part. I'm just going to go around and blend in all of this. And because the light is right on it, this eye would be a very, very dark brown if you were just looking at it in normal lighting. But because of the nature of the light that we're using in this case, it is going to appear a much more bright amber color. It's very saturated, and it makes things appear as they are not really. That was the weirdest phrasing I could have chosen there. Good job, Atlas. So yeah, it's going to kind of come out looking a bit like a sunflower, if I'm honest, which looks nice. But just make sure that it's even all the way around, and then go in and blend that bad boy. Make sure you don't forget your outlines to erase those. Make sure you've just got shape of your pupil and nothing else. So there should be no color, no nothing inside that iris, or inside that pupil, sorry. Because physically you cannot see into that part of the eye unless you shone a light back into it with like medical tools, which is kind of what this picture is like, but this is a spotlight from far away, not from that up close. I'm just going to go in and put in those rods and cone shape with my blend tool. And I would encourage you, just so that you can understand how those rods and cones work within that inverted contact lens shape of the iris, I'd invite you to study some pictures of eyes up close, maybe medical versions or what have you, just so you can see how those stop abruptly right where the pupil begins or where the sclera begins. I'm going to brighten up the sclera around here because this is a very bright light. And I believe it is time for shiny. So, this is going to go directly in the middle. And then our soft light is going to sort of encompass that. It's going to apply directly onto that waxy surface of the pupil. Whoop, too big. Still too big. And again. Yeah, no, we need a smaller brush. Beep, too bright. And there we go. Yeah. And then you'll have some more shinies around there showing the texture on the surface of the sclera and the pupil. Or the iris, my bad. So that's a very important thing to note, is that the pupil is not on the surface of the eye. It is deep inside the eye, which is why no light can reach it. So the surface of the iris is a perfect, rounded, smooth shape. There is no pupil on top of it. So, yeah. I think that's about it. Thank you guys for watching, and Malcolm, I hope this helps you. See you guys later.